What's up, guys, and welcome back to my channel. And if you're new here, then welcome to our little corner of the internet. Today we are reacting to a video titled "This is Crazy. Here's what happens if someone invades the US." Of course it's gonna be crazy. I mean, if there's anything that I've learned so far from doing this channel and watching our fellow Fed electrician, for example, is that if someone tries to invade the US, it is not going to go down well. They do not take these things lightly. But let's see what would happen, guys.
In 2023, the United States topped the list of countries with the highest military spending, allocating $916 billion for defense. The gap was huge. China came in second with $296 billion, followed by Russia with $109 billion. But even without the gap, the amount is huge. Just to give you an idea, there are 15 countries on this list, and if you add up the spending of 14 of them, you get about $1 trillion. Not much more than what the U.S. alone spent on its own. For those who love numbers, here's another fact. The figure amounted to more than 40% of global military spending that year in the whole world, and it's expected that the amount will only keep growing. By 2033, the U.S. will be spending up to $1.1 trillion on military expenses. But why? I mean, do they really need to spend that much? And does it actually make U.S. defense invincible? This is a complicated military topic. I need some coffee.
I mean, it's true from all the videos that I've seen. America spends the most in military than any other country. But they don't like. I mean, Americans make some pretty cool stuff, like the fighter jets and all of that. So I mean, America is very advanced. And I've seen a lot of comments say like, you have nothing to worry about, because I've talked about like, what if World War III breaks out, because I'm from Finland and Finnish is in alliance with America, and honestly that makes me feel very peaceful, very at peace. In the Americans I trust.
Need some coffee. An unobtrusive reminder to hit the like button if it slips your mind. And a big thanks to those who understand my wish to stay anonymous. Throughout U.S. history, only once did another country manage to invade the American capital. The British occupation, although brief, did happen. This was during the Anglo-American War of 1812 to 1815. The British attacked the former colonies after American troops had, in turn, invaded Canada and burned down government buildings. That's the short and simplified summary. Washington, D.C. was picked as a target because of its symbolic significance, easy access from the sea, and the American troops' inability to defend it. Back then, the American Army still seriously lacked experience. And so on August 24, 1814, the forces of both armies met outside Washington, and the British Army easily defeated the volunteer American forces in the Battle of Bladensburg. President Madison and Secretary of State James Monroe almost got captured. Afterward, the British troops set fire to the Capitol, the White House, the Library of Congress, and other government buildings. The next morning, British soldiers were looking for ammo and other supplies to burn, but after an accident with powder barrels killed 30 soldiers, the British decided to leave Washington. The occupation lasted exactly 2 days, but it still had a huge impact because the enemy literally took over the U.S. Capitol, and the president's family had to be urgently evacuated. Even though this was the only instance since the War of Independence when a foreign power did something like that, cases of intrusion into the country's territory did happen. For example, this happened during the Mexican War, but the occupation was short. The sea's territory was small, and it's pretty hard to call it a full-scale invasion. So it turns out that for over 200 years, the U.S. hasn't fought with another country on its territory. Are there reasons for that? Oh, definitely. But first, let's think about possible attack scenarios. So you don't have to be a great strategist to understand it's best to attack where a country is least defended. If we look at the USA, what do we see? The country surrounded by...
That pretty much summarizes how far my knowledge in wars go. You should attack where there's not much defenses.
So you don't have to be a great strategist to understand it's best to attack where a country is least defended. If we look at the USA, what do we see? The country's surrounded by oceans on two sides, so we need to choose the right coast to attack. To do that, hold on, I have a list. Here it is. This is what the list of the 10 states with the highest defense spending in the 2022 fiscal year looked like. It's clear that Virginia, Texas, and California are at the top in terms of defense, but it's also worth noting that 7 out of the 10 states on this list are located on the east coast of the country. Moreover, if you look at the map of the USA and how the military bases are located, you can also notice that a lot of them are concentrated on the east coast, as if it would be more logical to choose the west coast for an attack. Some experts discussing geopolitics online suggest that an invasion could be launched from the Gulf of Mexico to cut the country off from a significant portion of its oil supplies. However, there are 2 major caveats to consider. First of all, the U.S. has a strategic oil reserve for situations like this, and it's quite substantial. Secondly, an attack from the Gulf of Mexico puts the opponent in a tricky spot. In response, the U.S. could hit them from 3 different sides. In short, this idea isn't great. But of course, we can't say with 100% certainty where an attack on the U.S. might be planned. It all depends on the opponent, the nuances of their tactics, the situation at the specific moment in time, and all that. And only if we rely on some arguments can we assume that an invasion might happen from the western side, simply because there's less firepower there. On the other hand, this difference in firepower is very small, so it's unlikely that choosing one shore over the other would provide any serious advantage. But what if there's a land invasion? There are only 2 options here because the United States only shares land borders with Canada and Mexico. Meanwhile, all 3 countries are, at the moment, in neighborly partner relationships. A free trade agreement has been signed, and they all gain from the partnership. And not only from it, the U.S. and Canada have long been partners in defense and national security, plus mutual trade and investment between Canada and the U.S. support millions of jobs.
I mean, the U.S. is so so powerful that it's impossible to invade. I know we also watched the video of if the whole world went against America, and it still would be tricky to win. So imagine that, like, whoever would try to invade America, it's just like there's just, first of all, you would have to be very, very not okay in the head to do that, and most likely it would just end up in kind of like a manifestation. I mean, if you're smart enough, you'll know that it's only a manifestation. You're not gonna get anything out of it, most likely. So
to break such relationships, there has to be a really strong reason. And to be honest, I can't think of one. In short, the scenario where an invasion starts from Mexico or Canada is unlikely, at least under the current circumstances. Also, the military strength of Mexico and Canada falls short compared to that of the U.S. Plus, when countries are next to each other, they can quickly launch a counterstrike, and the U.S. definitely has the means to retaliate. No one would start a conflict with a clearly more powerful foe. But let's just assume that something happened. I don't know, a strange virus made everyone super aggressive and made them attack the neighboring country. Because there's a vast desert in the southwest United States, invaders from the south will have to move either to California or Texas. Yep, you remember right. These are 2 states with the most personnel, and they're the ones focused on the defense industry. Not the best spot for an attack. What about the north and Canada? Well, the invaders will have to cross the Great Lakes to get to the major cities, or at least they'll need to force a few serious rivers. In most areas along the U.S.-Canada border, potential invaders will find plenty of stunning national parks. It's really very beautiful there, but from a military value perspective, the territory, well, it's pretty much pointless. Canada has that kind of beauty too. Plus, in the event of an invasion, all those national parks would likely be filled with military personnel ready to defend. From this perspective, the terrain of the southern border, which is the border with Mexico, is more fitting for military operations. There aren't huge parks with forests and lakes, but there's the largest military base of the U.S. Army right in Texas, and launching an attack on the country in a spot like that would be extremely challenging. Looks like any land attack options are a no-go. So we'll have to think about attacking from the ocean on the west coast. But it's not so easy here either. I mean, this option is better than going overland and heading straight for a military base.
I mean, now that I think of it, if the whole world was against America, for example, but it's still impossible, because imagine that everybody would kind of like come from different corners of America, and you know, it would be completely secret and out of the blue. So it would take a little bit more time for America to, you know, strike back, which I actually don't think, because they're prepared for everything and anything always. Um, but even in that scenario, it would be very hard. And also, if you had, but that would like probably be the only option. But even if that happened, there's always going to be someone who's going to tell, you know. So it wouldn't. It's just, it's impossible. It's impossible. I feel like America is untouchable, which is so cool. I want to move there. I want to be safe too. Nah, I think I actually, I don't know, like I haven't really, I don't really watch like the news when it comes to the wars and stuff. I am very aware of it and all of that, but um it's like, you know, it's not something that I would like actively follow. But I don't know how probable it is that a World War III or something like that would break out. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on that, because mm, I feel like, I don't know, maybe maybe there's more common sense now than, for example, during the World War II, in where, you know, it wouldn't be as tragic, I would hope. But then again, you know, seeing the things that are happening in the world right now, I could be completely wrong. So yeah.
But it's way easier to say, we're attacking the west coast of the U.S., than to actually do it. Mainly because the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans are two huge bodies of water that serve as natural barriers, keeping North America apart from Europe, Africa, and Asia. Before launching an attack on a country from the sea, these obstacles will need to be overcome, and it has to be done somehow without being noticed. This is hard. Transporting military troops and gear takes time, and during that time, the enemy will be extremely vulnerable in the open ocean, and the U.S. definitely won't just stand by and watch as a fleet from some country heads their way. So the ships will start bombing and sinking them using any available methods. The enemy will have to decide which ships to use for moving equipment and personnel. Larger ships are slow, heavy, and exposed, while smaller ones are at risk due to their limited range. The smaller the ship, the tougher it'll be to cross the ocean. And even if you manage to pull off such an operation, you won't win the war by shelling the shore from ships. You'll have to land troops. These operations are called amphibious assaults, and they're considered some of the most complex and dangerous in any war. With the U.S. having enough time, they'll be able to pull troops to the shore, and in the end, the invasion will probably not even start. The enemy will be defeated, unable to land on the shore or immediately after landing. So it turns out that for such an invasion to succeed, the U.S. Army would have to be unbelievably weak, while the enemy's army would have to be unbelievably strong.
I have such major respect for people who are in the army as well, like, are in the military, because it's so hard for me to watch this and think of it as a like objectively, as in, or hypothetically, because, you know, I don't know, but like, it's just, it's like, you know, I'm trying to think like, yeah, troops, ships, and all of that, but there's people in the ships that have families, and it's just, it's very hard for me to not like bawl my eyes out every time I listen to something about war, because there's so many people that are affected. It's so sad, but I'm trying my best to kind of stay is the word objective? I don't know if that's the right word, but you know what I mean, guys.
A scenario that's as far from reality as you can get. A good example of what a landing on the shore looks like is the landing of American, British, and Canadian troops in Normandy during World War II. This landing is the largest amphibious invasion in human history, and it was only successful because the enemy was misled. If the German command had known the exact date and location of the landing, all subsequent events would have unfolded quite differently. And even though basically the Allied forces only had to cross the English Channel, Such an operation still took several years of preparation and a ton of strategic maneuvers, although it only took about 24 to 36 hours to actually cross the channel. Now imagine you have to cross an entire ocean, and the ways to track the enemy have changed a lot since World War II. Regardless of the size of the forces or their weapons, all of this needs to be delivered across a vast, unprotected stretch of ocean, well, or by air. But in any case, the naval and air power of the U.S. can wipe out any opponent long before they reach the coast. Some experts even say that all the fleets in the world don't have enough aircraft carriers and amphibious assault ships to break through the U.S. Navy. There won't be enough fighter jets to gain air superiority either. So maybe the two oceans on either side of the U.S. are the main reason why no one has invaded the country for 2 centuries. The U.S. is just too far away to get troops there. In any case, pulling this off quickly and without being noticed so that the U.S. troops can't get ready for the landing isn't going to happen. But the country has done everything it can to make something like this just plain impossible. First off, we should thank the military satellites, which are specifically made for gathering intelligence, navigation, and military communication. As of December 2018, there were 320 known military or dual-use satellites in the sky, half of them belonging to the U.S., and the rest are split between Russia, China, and India. But these are very, very rough figures. Due to the high level of secrecy surrounding satellites, it's almost impossible to estimate how many exactly are in orbit. A satellite was first used for military-related purposes. It was a photo reconnaissance mission. The U.S. was the pioneer in this field, starting to work with military satellites back in the 1950s. For a while, the country even wanted to equip them with weapons to attack targets on the ground, but then they dropped that initiative. Today, satellites can track the movements of
Also, imagine everything that we like is known to the public and everything that's not known to the public.
enemy forces, gather data, and send it to the relevant agency, and satellites work all the time. With such a level of aerial surveillance, sneaking up on the U.S. is just impossible. No way, unless you dig a tunnel under the ocean. Military satellites don't just track enemy troop movements. There's also the Defense Support Program, and its satellites detect missile launches or spacecraft, even nuclear explosions, all using sensors that pick up infrared radiation. So even a sudden airstrike with missiles is off the table. But technologies for early detection exist not only in space. For example, there's a system called Relocatable Over-the-Horizon Radar. It's designed to provide wide-ranging surveillance of both aircraft and ships. This system covers a wedge-shaped area of 64 degrees at a distance of 575 to 1,865 miles. Originally, the system was meant for tracking the movement of ships and planes over the Pacific Ocean during the Cold War. This way, they could coordinate fleet movements well ahead of a fight. How? To put it simply, the system uses atmospheric disturbances to spot incoming threats. Right now, the enemy will also have to deal with the U.S. Navy's 11 nuclear-powered fleet carriers, which will spot the invasion long before it comes to landing on the shore. But there's one more thing that definitely needs to be mentioned in connection with U.S. defense, and that's nuclear weapons. Let's consider a really extreme case where countries
There was also a video we watched on nuclear weapons, but what I like. Are there different types of nuclear weapons and like how? Because in my head, in my very little brain, that's probably the size of a grape. If there would be a nuclear war, everything's just gone. You know, like that's what I've understood so far. That's like the worst case scenario, no?
decide that the planet is no longer useful to them and it's time to use nuclear weapons. The U.S. has about 7,700 nuclear warheads in total, including 1,950 warheads ready for deployment via intercontinental ballistic missiles, submarines, and planes, as well as thousands of others that are in storage or awaiting dismantlement.
See, this is also what leads me to believe that they're gonna be used. Why would you make something that you won't use? I mean, to threaten, yeah, but I mean, if they made them, they're gonna be used at some point, most likely, you know? Because obviously America is not the only one with nuclear weapons. I mean, someone's gonna pull the trigger at some point. That's so scary to think about, but most likely, no? Or I don't know. But I mean, it's kind of like having that red button right in front of you. So I don't know, it's tricky.
The closest country in terms of nuclear military power is Russia. They have a bit more warheads, around 8,500, but only 1,800 of them are operational. For comparison, China has about 250 nuclear warheads, a bit less than France, which has 300, and a bit more than the UK, which has 225. At the same time, a nuclear war with any country that has a decent capability is mutual assured destruction. This is not a metaphor or an exaggeration. It's a specific existing term. It refers to the doctrine from the Cold War according to which the use of weapons of mass destruction by both sides would lead to the complete destruction of both sides. Within this doctrine, it's impossible and pointless to suddenly strike the opponent with a massive nuclear strike. Everyone will just die. There will be no winner. So no country really has a decent incentive to nuke the US. It would just lead to mutual destruction. By the way, that's one hell of a strong deterrent. And no, taking out all American nuclear weapons beforehand won't work either. If you believe the experts, it's practically impossible to eliminate the U.S. nuclear arsenal because it's based on a triad of land, air, and sea delivery systems. In short, you'll have to deactivate weapons from several types and at several locations all at once. For example, ballistic missiles launched from submarines are considered the most effective element of the U.S. nuclear deterrent since some of them are always out at sea. Ground-based missiles are also hard to eliminate since they're in fortified silos deep inside the country. You have to be really lucky as a saboteur to get in there. So it looks like for attacking the U.S. with nuclear weapons, the enemy needs to create their own missile defense system. No modern technology can pull that off. Well, all's clear when it comes to nuclear weapons. If they're used, there's only one scenario. Let's picture some kind of military miracle. Enemy forces cross the ocean without anyone noticing, then they manage to land smoothly on the west coast of the U.S. What a stroke of luck! What's next? Well, specialists and just people with good imagination believe that the country is going to be safe thanks to its geography. It's because of geography that the U.S. is never likely to be successfully captured by any foreign power. Look at the map. The continental part of the USA is huge. I mean, it's just gigantic. No matter which side the enemy invades the country from, they'll find the same huge variety of landscapes: forests, swamps, mountains, deserts, river systems, canyons. Different landscapes mean different conditions for fighting. To fight effectively, special training and sometimes equipment are needed for each landscape, not to mention the logistics of moving troops through these forests, swamps, mountains. Well, you get it. Depending on the area, different types of forces need to be used, and the invader will have to quickly adapt on the ground. At the same time, the American military in the same area will already be prepared for everything.
That's true. I never thought about that too, that America has so many different landscapes that they would have to have, different people for. I mean, he explained it. I don't know why I need to re-explain it, but that's like something that I didn't think of.
And imagine what it's like to advance through open areas like deserts and plains. For American aviation, the enemy is like a target at a shooting range. Military analyst Dylan Lerke suggests that the combined military potential of the rest of the world would be insufficient to even get a foothold on the continental United States. And the key word here is get a foothold, because it's not enough to successfully land in someone else's country. You need to advance troops inland, capture, and then also hold territories. In this territory, there are not only civilian facilities, but also military bases. According to their own public estimates, the U.S. has 598 military facilities in 40 countries, as well as 4,461 bases within the states. This is a list of the countries where U.S. military bases and facilities are located. Along with a large number of bases in Germany, the U.S. has major military facilities in Qatar and Diego Garcia Atoll, as well as in Japan and South Korea. The U.S. Armed Forces have about 1.4 million active duty personnel and 850,000 reservists. But some of these people are scattered around the globe, stationed at U.S. bases, overall about 10%. The rest of the military are inside the country, and they'll fight. Moreover, many of these soldiers have real combat experience, and that might even be more important than all the technology and equipment. If you look at the military conflicts that have happened in the last 20 to 30 years, you can see that the U.S. has been involved in many of them one way or another. We're not considering the moral side of the issue right now, just the facts, okay? In addition, there were two wars where the U.S. was really involved as a fighting party, the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War. The first one ended in 2011, the second in 2021, so pretty recently. I don't think I'll be wrong if I assume that the country and its commanders gained practical experience, and considering that the war in Afghanistan lasted from 2001 and it's the longest war in U.S. history, there was plenty of time to gain experience. Not to mention that wars involving the U.S. are also a testing ground for new technologies that can later be used for the defense of their country. And don't forget about the civilian population in the States, people who also have guns. Guns that these people know how to use. You can often see a quote on the internet that's attributed to Isoroku Yamamoto, the commander-in-chief of the combined fleet of the Japanese Empire during World War II.
This is another thing I did not think about. That's actually crazy because, okay, imagine even if Finland was the size, well, Finnish people are built different though. I'm half Finnish, so I can say that without being like, but you know, in Europe we don't have guns or you know, stuff like that. So it would, you know, if a war was to break out, I wouldn't know what to do. I mean, yeah, I would probably just cry and crawl up in a ball.
The combined fleet of the Japanese Empire during World War II. Here's the quote. "You cannot invade mainland United States. There would be a rifle behind every blade of grass." In fact, there are no records that the commander-in-chief of the Japanese fleet ever said these words. However, this quote describes the situation in the U.S. pretty accurately. A new study published in the journal Injury Prevention on July 25, 2024, showed that of all gun owners, 78.8% own their firearms for protection, 58.1% of gun owners carried their weapon outside their home in the past 12 months, 72% of gun owners named protection as the major reason for owning a gun, while 91% said it was the major or minor reason. And it's not exactly a new thing from recent years. Since 1972, the percentage of American households that own at least one firearm has stayed pretty stable, ranging from 37 to 47%. In 2023, around 42% of U.S. households had at least one firearm. In fact, more than 175 countries around the world allow their citizens to own firearms, but the USA is in first place by a huge margin. Next are the Falkland Islands, Yemen, and New Caledonia, but they have 2 to 3 times fewer guns per capita. Well, I'm not making any bold statements, but we can assume that in the event of a potential invasion, ordinary Americans won't just sit on their hands, especially since many actually know how to shoot. New nuclear missile. In June 2024, the U.S. Air Force conducted a test launch of the Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile to provide confidence in the lethality and effectiveness of the nation's nuclear deterrent. To showcase their power, the military also released video footage and photos of the missile, which, let's be honest, are seriously impressive. The rocket launched on Tuesday, June 4th at 12:56 a.m. local time from Vandenberg Space Force Base, located north of Santa Barbara along the coast of Central California. An intercontinental ballistic missile standing 60 feet tall had a warhead that flew about 4,200 miles and landed near a remote military base in the Marshall Islands, deep in the central part of the Pacific Ocean. The truth is, there wasn't an actual nuclear charge in the missile. They were testing a non-nuclear bomb after all. The U.S. Air Force claims that this test is not the result of current world events, noting that over 300 similar tests have been conducted in the past. They don't mean that the world is on the brink of World War III. On the contrary, they emphasize once again that it won't happen. About 400 intercontinental ballistic missiles, Minuteman III, are currently stationed at Air Force bases in Colorado, Montana, Nebraska, North Dakota, and Wyoming, where they've been on combat duty for more than 50 years. Microwave weapon against drones. The U.S. Navy plans to test its first powerful microwave weapon aboard a naval vessel as early as 2026. The experimental weapon, known as the Meteor Project, will emit beams of intense electromagnetic energy to disable the electronics of drones. This will help avoid wasting ammo on shooting down such tech. Luckily, something like energy can't run out, unlike bullets, for example, and each shot is relatively cheap, in theory. Microwave weapons are part of the U.S. military's interest in directed energy systems. This is a new type of weapon that can hit targets without solid projectiles. Along with microwaves, this includes things like lasers, sound waves, and even particle beams. Actually, the manufacturer of directed energy
This is some sci-fi stuff right here.
weapons, Epirus, is already supplying the military with powerful microwave capabilities designed to take out drone electronics. And now the Navy's getting ready to test how well the company's technology handles taking out unmanned. The manufacturer of directed energy weapons, Epirus, is already supplying the military with powerful microwave capabilities designed to take out drone electronics. And now the Navy's getting ready to test how well the company's technology handles taking out unmanned surface vessels. Other countries, by the way, are also ramping up their production of directed energy weapons. Recently, the UK showcased its Dragonfire system, basically a giant laser cannon capable of taking down airborne targets, and we're talking about really small targets at a range of 0.6 miles. Future technologies as they are. You owe me a like. See you later.
No, I did not want it to end. That was so interesting, actually, guys. That was an interesting video to watch. That was interesting. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I would love to hear what you think. I think these are just like such big concepts. They make me nervous. But if I was American, I'd be very, very, very calm if I were you guys. Thanks, guys, for joining me for this video. I hope you liked it. Please leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!